Roberto, you and I had quite a few conversations over the years, right? And I don't think we've ever had the chance to record it and share it with the public. So this is a first. Welcome on the show.
Which is, it's kind of a shame, right? Because we possibly there was some gold nuggets over there, but thank you for having me.
Yeah. Today we will try to immortalize that inspiration. So we'll try to find those nuggets. So you've been speaking at many events over the years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people know you in the data space.
Mm-hmm.
One question I don't think I ever asked you: how did you get into the world of data?
Oh, that's a good one. So how did it happen? Data was a bit of a gestation in my head, and you need to know that I come from, my background gives me some versatility. Let's put it this way. So at school in Italy, I didn't go for the scientific kind of more avenue. I went more into the scholastic one. So I spent 5 years managing Latin, Greek, philosophy, history. So a very humanistic kind of a background. But I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I unfortunately the issue was that I couldn't fit in a plane. At the time in Italy, they were flying the F-104, which basically is a pipe with a hole for the pilot. And I tried the cockpit and couldn't go more than my knees into it. So I had to, settle for the aeronautical engineering at university. Although my mom wanted always me to go to be an archaeologist. But that's kind of it's been a bit of a dichotomy in my head for a while. Then coming out of university, there was no jobs going in aeronautics. And so I had to recycle myself as a IT guy. And I started from the lowest possible level, help desking. Not in terms of, I don't want to belittle that, but it's very much the entry step, which I suggest and recommend everyone to go through, because it gives you a very wide perspective of what really IT should do, right? Because you are in touch with the customer, so to speak. But over the years, through my different roles in different blue chips, there was always this kind of a mantra that IT people are developing. We are IT, data is yours. Business, you manage data, we manage the boxer, the container. And I felt that as a limitation. And it was a limitation that at a certain point in my career almost got me fired, because guess what? I was trying to deliver this thing, which was a very important dashboard. And why couldn't I put this dashboard live? Because the two people that were supposed to sign off my dashboard were in disagreement on the definition of one thing. And we've been going back and forth 6 months on that. So when I went to, so I went down through this technical route, but I was getting more and more involved from, let's say, the business side. And a certain day in NG Capital, I met Basel II. And Basel II, for the people who are not knowing financial services, was the first regulation in financial services really very hungry for data. There is a story that says that the problems that were found at the core of the scandals in the crisis in 2008, one of those problems, one of those issues was found because people were starting calculating stuff in Basel II, and the technical was saying, this can't be possible, this can't be possible. And in reality, it was possible. There was a big hole there. But then, Basel II gave me the exposure to certain aspects of the technical part for delivering a business outcome. They were pushing in the direction of, I need someone as expert in not just in the technical bit, I need someone expert in the definition, what it is. I need someone that can tell me how to validate what I find in the systems and tell me really that what it is in the system is conform to reality. So long story short, the first time I saw in front of me a job description for a chief data officer, I literally felt I was falling on the road to Damascus. I saw the light. I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And that's how, and I never looked back since. So it's a journey of passion. Now back to my Greek kind of understanding, passion comes from pathos, and pathos is suffering, right? So if you're passionate for something, you will end up suffering because that something is not really adopted and reflected in the people around you. But it's a journey that I believe historically is putting most of us in the right moment, the right place in history and time. and space, possibly to help humanity to, go to the next step.
I actually never noticed this, that passion comes from pathos. Or is that the pronunciation? Pathos?
Well, it depends. Usually the th it's a theta, which so you pronounce it a bit like the th in English. But yeah, pathos is, and actually in Greek we're saying pathos, which is the suffering, the laboring of something intense, bring you to the mathos, which is the learning, and then and you approach your passion, you learn something because you suffer, you learn something, and you embed something bit better in your life to come. So that's, you see, we're going to get to the point in which we say that more or less 25 centuries of history, well, we're still the same. We're still human beings, still having the same problems, still learning the same things, right?
Exactly. Well, the human being and data and the connection. Well, we can explore this because when we talk about passion, you're passionate about something. Suffering is one thing, but also if you manage to make that suffering meaningful, right? You can even say that that's the key to life. So we are probably gonna go to some philosophical areas as well, which I'm passionate about too. And I know just from experience, when it comes to data, talk to so many people, and I know you're the same, is that the challenges are rarely about technology. It's rarely the technical stuff. It's really about engaging people. So let's maybe take half a step back. What actually makes you so passionate about data? We already touched on it, but over the years, if we reflect on your suffering, what made it meaningful to you?
It made it meaningful because it gave me the opportunity to look at problems in a way that were never looked at before. And a typical example is, we've been going through the 90s and probably the early noughties, and there was a lot of IT replatforming, IT consolidation, and how many of those have failed? Possibly the majority. Or how many of those basically they were, like, again, from the Latin we say, how many mountains in the end give birth to a mouse? Because immense amount of investment, they were actually delivering a sub-fraction of an organization that was kind of using that thing. The issue is always, once you come from the data angle, let's call it like that, you start, and actually even more interesting, the metadata angle, you start to understand that, yeah, if you keep on treating system integration or system consolidation as almost from a plumbing point of view, tell me where do I put these 2 liters of data, and see if I put these 2 liters of data from this system to this system, the pump will work anyway. You miss the fact that that system is an enabling process. That process is used by people. People are making decisions. So people are having beliefs. People are having expectations. So looking at metadata as a kind of a conduit in understanding and creating an ecosystem or a contextualizing what's happening, gives you I believe a much better chance to deliver what you're expecting. The other aspect is regulations. We are a complex world. We're going to be even more complex. And we can start to talk about all the data protectionistic laws that are coming out, all the expectation from a public and having the same kind of power on their data that the companies are having. Again, if I look in the past, where I was more in financial services and people were keeping on chasing the single regulation, trying to deliver something very piecemeal, the problem was always coming, and it's coming even more now, from 2 aspects. Firstly, regulators are talking to each other, and where all your fantastic strategy of responding regulators fails is when 2 regulators are asking you the same question and you give to them 2 different answers, right? So they're gonna check with each other and say, hey, what is this guy about? and that's one problem. The second problem in managing the regulation is that you're never gonna be strategic, because regulations are usually physiologically responding to a market problem, right? So if you are chasing the regulations, you're going to be reactive. And so understanding that the regulators are now telling you something more interesting, which is no longer, please give me the piece of data, please do that, because regulators are treating regulated entities as, frankly speaking, teenagers that have been told many, many times to remove the garbage from the floor, to put the cupboard in a bit more of a better status. And now regulators are going by principles and saying, hey, man, be tidy. Now, be tidy and demonstrating to be tidy is a much more complex problem if you're not really tidy by principle and everything you do is actually giving you as an outcome the fact you're a bit tidier. So that's where I think coming from a data angle, coming from a metadata angle, gives you a better way to respond to regulation, because in a way, if you know at any point in time, at any point in space where your data is, there is no regulation you can answer. And there's no regulation you can answer in an inconsistent way, because you're always gonna know where you stand, which is, by the way, the key to be also a resilient organization, because if you don't know where you stand, you can't be resilient.
You mentioned so many good points that I want to explore. So one thing that you mentioned, that you don't want to be reactive. You don't want to be just reacting to your circumstances when it comes to regulation. You kind of take the reins and drive things forward and take ownership of the narrative. Now, just looking at your career, right? Because I know that we haven't really touched on the specific job titles, but if someone looks at your LinkedIn profile, they can see this elevation, progress. You quickly got into very senior positions, chief data officer at GE Capital, then chief data officer over at Lloyd's, now data excellence VP at Schneider Electric. So how important do you think was leadership, like actually conscious leadership for you to have a vision and drive it forward in a company, if you just juxtapose that with the idea that people in data should be just merely a support function and just kind of passively going along with the business and provide data where you need it? And how important do you think this really proactive, assertive leadership is?
Proactive and assertive leadership helps you, especially when you have to realize that data is not giving the business more dashboards, right? But data is a change of lifestyle. Someone was very good at teaching me and nurturing me into data, taught me this very early on. So data is a change of lifestyle, is not a fad, and you never end. So you are in a process of permanent augmentation, because data is the lifeblood of a digital business, and a digital business will ever change. So you need to keep on pumping fresh blood, so to speak, right? So, and go back to your question, is the difference is really understanding. Once you understand that the OR is a change role, is not a technical role, but in change there are some technicalities, right? Because when people are too often confusing technical with technological role, but because there are technical means that you're, again, we're going back to Greek, techne is basically the art, a very precise profession, right? So professionally, you are a data person, so you know certain things from a professional point of view. Forget for a second that those certain things might be then instigated or installated in a system, but the reality is there are rules, there are frameworks, there are practices that you know. So once you know that there is a technical background because you need to be a practitioner, but basically your agenda is agenda of change, then what is changing is not the walls of an office, it's not the systems, really, are the people. And then proactive leadership, so being able to understand sociologically what's going on in an organization, understanding how the organization reacts to learning new things, to unlearning old things, right? Because that's another point. So sometimes to get on the journey of data, you have to let go of some things. And that's painful, because those things, if you've been 20 years in the company, are your offsprings, right? That's something you are really attached to. And having someone coming from outside and say, look, it sounds like what you've done for the last 20 years probably wasn't exactly the best thing to do. We should probably try to put away a couple of those and build from you. You need to be empathically connected to people to understand that might have a bad reaction and you need to deal with that. So the proactive thing I was describing, you were describing, I'm actually describing with a new word that someone taught me, which is nemawashi. It's actually Japanese. Mm-hmm. And in Japanese is the activity that has to go around in the soil where you're trying to plant a new plant to favor the rooting of the plant. So you need to work around the soil, you need to prepare the soil, and preparing the soil is you need to work with who's going to receive this beautiful plant that is called data and is going to let it bloom? And those are the people that are going to need to appreciate what it is. Because like everything in the digital world, if people cannot get the value through the trust of the person selling them that, basically whatever you're going to sell them is going to be perceived as useless. So if I go around and say, look, there's this beautiful algorithm that now is going to predict, depending on the shoe size of the CEO of the company you're trying to sell to, whether you're going to sell or not. If people that don't trust me, don't trust the algorithm, don't trust the way the algorithm is done, don't trust what's behind it, it will never fly. So the proactive leadership, the intent you have when you go somewhere and you try again, and sometimes you feel that you're repeating message, and you don't know if you're basically reaching the boundary of what Einstein was calling insanity, trying again under the same circumstance and expecting a different outcome, or literally you are 2 seconds away to win over the inertia of a mechanism and things are starting to move, then that's probably where it tests your resolve and see if your leadership is well placed. I don't know if I answered completely your question, but maybe we open us a few other doors here.
Oh, right? Yeah, we always keep opening these doors, and I'm like, okay, which one should we go into?
We're becoming hypertextuals, right? And there are multiple screens happening.
Exactly, and I knew this was going to happen even before we started the conversation. I knew it.
We decided not to script it, right? So everything can happen. Anything can happen.
Yes, anything but linear. Anything but linear. So I'm just like, okay, which door to go into? Okay, so first of all, I love this. You said nemawashi. This Japanese word.
Yes.
Yeah. Japanese people have all these good words like kaizen, continuous improvement, nemawashi, preparing the soil, basically, right? Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. So basically, you're working on the soil in a way that when you plant the seedling, that will find a favorable environment to thrive. That's if you think about it, it's preparing people around to receive data and appreciate data.
So it's so cool because we literally, I remember when we agreed to do the podcast, it was literally like, hey, Roberto, long time no talk. You want to do the podcast? You're like, yeah, one condition, no script. I'm like, deal. And then now we're talking. Now, it's funny. Why I say this is funny because I talk a lot about on these podcasts about this Trinitarian structure of storytelling. Okay. I'm also a fan of philosophy. So why Trinitarian? Well, first of all, okay, stories. We all understand that stories can be your main tool if you know how to use them to change people's perception and action. A moving story, it's about moving an individual from one place to another. Okay, now I have this model that I think is pretty neat to conceptualize. So Trinitarian structure, why? Because when we talk about storytelling, there are 3 main components. First of all, you have the person who the story comes from, the storyteller, right? So what position you're telling your story. It's really important, how you're being perceived and how you're being received. Great. Then the second component is the person you're telling the story to, your target audience. And then the third piece is the story itself shared between the two, right? Actually,
the payload.
Exactly, the payload, right? So I actually call it Trinitarian because, again, some philosophy, maybe a little bit of religion, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is that, the Son proceeds from the Son, and then the Holy Spirit is the love shared between them. So I think it's a pretty neat way to conceptualize it. So I always talk about how when you tell a story, the relationships that you have with the people, that's the soil, right? And you plant the story in there. Now, let's talk about, because I want to treat this technical part. I want to give it its proper due as well before we really go into the people and the storytelling, which I know that, you just have so many great insights on. I mean, both in our personal conversations and also at our previous roundtables in Europe, I remember you delivered some amazing like nuggets of knowledge that I want to explore again, but just a technical side. So what do you think right now in 2022, what are the most important components? What should data leaders prioritize when it comes to technical knowledge? You can say anything, right? But you might even say that, just go with the flow, just get the basics in, but I just want to treat it so we can put it aside and focus on the people. So what do you think should be done by a data professional today? What kind of direction should they take when they want to be really strong in the technical foundations?
But now when you say technical, you're still talking about technological, right? So how we enable what we do, right? Because if I think about what we need to have as a techne, as a structure in our mind, we need to start to think about all the problems we're going to have from multiple angles, like the ethics of data, the protectionism of data. Those are creating such huge challenges for us that for a second you might want to hold on, oh, should I take certification in this cloud thing, or should I do this thing in data mesh? Maybe you want to start to understand a bit, especially if you are in a journey, if you are in a moment in which you are really trying to understand strategically, how do I position myself in the next 5 years? I mean, the next 5 years, the way we're going to do data is going to be less and less, oh, let's put some pipe here and there, but it be more and more, how do I understand exactly the mechanism that brings this thing called data to obtain value for the business? And that's not a technical, technological issue. And possibly is technological for certain companies, but it's very much it gets down to an emotional part of the process, because let's not forget that, buying is still a very much of an emotional action. So there is no algorithm today that finally can push the button for you and you buy. At the end, you need to push the button. And again, there's the second of saying, is it because I want it, or is it because, so going back to technological, I think there is a need for a omni-comprehensive view of what your company is. So if I wanted to, whatever is going to be the enabler for that, definitely cloud is a big enabler. But I see more and more a value in pushing metadata management, pushing the understanding, the collection of what we now call, in the industry, the data intelligence to the nth grade. So, and the nth grade for me is literally understanding how and translating all these relationship between the different component and facets of the mechanism that we look at in this company, including people, to a beautiful, visible relationship model. Mm-hmm. And in the past, when I was saying that I wanted to do enterprise digital twins as my main armament and weapon, final weapon to win all the regulations and to deliver possibly a very comprehensive, very harmonized data management, people were looking at me like, yeah, man, it's never going to happen. But nowadays, I mean, if you think about where we're going with the data meshes of the world, with a bit of a battery issue, right? Where we are going to, the majority of the big players, they're basically understanding that the key is not in how fast in the system, but the key is in how interconnected is the system, how many relationships, how many connections, how many synapses, what you're looking at can give you, so that you understand what are the intimate relationship with everything you have around. You can start to do precise attribution of value, precise attribution of causality, and so on. So that's where I think overall I will say that technically I would like myself to be extremely more proficient, and I will encourage people to look into.
That makes perfect sense. So now that we treated that aspect, the techne, right? So let's move on to people. What you said about sales, this is, I mean, I'm saying sales because when you say people making decisions, well, you always have to sell an idea. I mean, actually being a data leader, it's about selling data to senior management, to your business users, to all stakeholders, even to your customers, your data-driven way of working. Now, what have you identified over your career as the bottleneck in terms of people understanding and embracing data? And I know it's a big question, so maybe we can, pick it apart, but just off the cuff. I know I might be throwing you a curveball, not because you wouldn't know the answer, because it's such a huge question, right? But just off the cuff, how would you start even approaching this problem?
Well, it's something that I try to code in my data excellence approach, because it's based on 3 pillars. And the first pillar is all about culture, and not culture in terms of, you need to be literate about data, because sometimes when you go into the people, well, I'm going to give you a bit of data literacy, they will kind of interpret, so are you telling me I'm an illiterate? And they might not be in the right frame of mind to receive the message. To your point, the story might bounce. So So I guess culture in understanding what are the behaviors and the beliefs and the customs that today are detrimental to good use of data, good management of data, extracting good value out of data, and trying to connect that to creating stories, creating the examples, creating the metaphors, because I'm a big believer in metaphors, because metaphors are usually pictures, and brains are, at least I'm more of a visual person. For me, pictures are important, and pictures usually are worth 1,000 words. So that's where you're trying to work first. So, and the most difficult thing in data for people to understand, it's not difficult to understand, it's actually there are misconception. So there are misconceptions around data quality. So what is data quality? I go into a system, I run some rules, and I see things are wrong, and I'll fix them. Yeah, the problem is that if you don't ask the person that at the end of the chain of many systems will actually consume the data, whether what you've done is good or wrong, or right or wrong, you're never going to win, right? So there is we don't help ourselves as data leaders, because we are waddling in a lot of jargon like everyone else, and we love creating new jargon, and we love to sometimes show off, right? So but that's not just us. Every profession does that, right? I don't want to get to the level of the Masons, but I mean every profession has got their own language, secret handshake. So that's something that you need to be. As long as you are conscious of that, and as long as you were saying before beautifully in your Trimurti or trilogy of the story, as long as the payload is nicely wrapped, right? I don't think there's a problem. So, and as long as you go, parading around that, random forest is, and people will understand that you're doing things randomly, which is not the right thing to. I mean, as long as you are able to empathically and polytropically. So, I mean, that you need to tailor the message. I think it's fine. The issue sometimes is that we don't understand what is not understood. So the issue sometimes is that you believe that you are communicating over and over again that definitional integrity is incredibly important. And people will say, yeah, it is important, And then the same people will say, okay, I'm actually asking now 100 people in 100 different countries to send me customer orders by customer product, and you believe you're going to receive exactly that without saying anything else. Then you understand that they didn't understand that definitional integrity is important, because otherwise they will actually send a 5 pages long requirement. What is a custom? What is order? What is product? Right? And so the inability sometimes, or of going beyond the words you're receiving, the message you're receiving, when, everyone will tell you data is incredibly important. Data is incredibly important. But what are you ready to do to demonstrate that you understand how important it is? How much you are ready to spend? And then usually is a litmus test to see whether where you are on the same place. I'll resume. Basically, the extreme synthesis of this is something that was coming from one of the most probably the most powerful training we were having in GE, which was called Change Acceleration Process, CAP, and was always saying, ending always, check for understanding, check for agreement. Every single meeting, every single discussion you're having, you conclude with a check for understanding and you check for agreement. So if we understand the same thing, and if we agree on the same thing, I think you're fine. But that's not an art. That's not something like a sixth sense, and that doesn't happen all the time. So again, the ambiguity sometimes hits us.
This is so cool. I never heard this. So CAP, change acceleration process, right? And then you check for understanding, and you check for, what was the second? Understanding?
Check for agreement. Sorry, it was agreement.
Agreement. Okay, so understanding and agreement. Okay, so I don't know. Can you give just a vague example of this? So you can use anything.
Yeah, typical. So in companies, well, each one of us will probably go in the new companies that will try to establish a logical domain model, right? Why you do that? Because in the soup of data you're having around the company, you want to start to put a bit of order, to start to assign responsibility, to vectorize some priority. So But if you go in the way you approach this is that, guys, we need a logical domain model. Yep. And we want to just separate data in everything that starts with an A, everything starts with B, everything starts with a C. Yep. But you don't check first, do you understand what a domain means, right? And you understand that domain is actually doesn't coincide with organizations, but it's something different. It's a family of data. So you will end up 6 months after, 1 year after, having people using domain in a completely different manner, right? And having people not understanding it, ownership of data, domain, doesn't mean physical ownership, doesn't mean I have the data in my system, therefore I own it, but it's more like you own a concept for the company. You own the customer as a concept. Semantically, because if we don't have that concept, we don't have a yardstick to go around the different systems and check whether that customer is compliant, conform or not. Then, yeah, that's the typical example. So you didn't check for an agreement that an understanding that understood, and you didn't agree that based on that logical data domain, then roles would have been assigned, task would have been executed, and outcome should have been achieved, right? So that's one. But you have any time you get in a meeting with people and you don't do that, you can come out of the meeting with possibly something that 2 weeks after people will actually not recognize as the thing they agreed, right? So I think it's just a very, very good practice to assure that as human beings, we are aligning what we're trying to do, because we know we're very creative and our brain is not a computer. We'll embellish, we'll edit, so, and we'll reinforce our beliefs. So it's always a problem.
You mentioned jargon, and again, it's one of those things. So I always talk about this crusade against jargon, because one of these main problems that I identified, and we'll have some thoughts about this, is that there is this perception problem of data analytics in companies, because yes, we've been riding this wave of the trend for like a decade now, right? Everyone loves it.
Even more.
Yeah, exactly.
You're younger than me. If you're younger than me.
You've been around the block. So if you ask a business person, right, should we do AI, machine learning? Oh, yeah, sure. Like AI, machine learning, yes. Everyone does it. Yeah. But then if you even just start scratching the surface of what that means, you just lost people. There's this deep confusion. And again, when we talk about persuasion and influence, which is basically sales, these are almost synonyms, right? You sell an idea, you present an idea, you influence someone with an idea, you persuade someone about something. These mean the same. Now, I always said that when it comes to persuasion and even sales, right, even those really negative emotions, like let's say antipathy or even hate, is better than confusion. Confusion is the kryptonite to
absolutely. You know what? And that's funny you saying that, because I was having a little gauge that I was using in the past to understand whether my persuasion or influence was at the right level. And it's a bit like the state of emotion you go through when you have bad news, denial. So I know that, and until people are just nodding, yeah, they completely don't understand, right? The moment in which things are start to turning is when people start to challenge, because to challenge, you need to understand what's going on, and you don't agree, and then you know that, okay, now we're getting somewhere. And it's funny, because it's exactly that. You want to start, if people are not seeing, when they're starting to challenge, it means that understand in reality what it means for them, and might have a emotion. So you then ride that emotion and you try to go from the challenging to, okay, now we agree. Again, we check, we agree, and we go together in the same place. But it's very, very true.
Yeah, and also now that you mentioned this, that when they start to challenge you, that's a good sign. So most of the sales and persuasion literature that's out there, like 99% is garbage. But then there is that 1% that actually knows what it's talking about. And a lot of people ask, when you go through this whole process of, hey, I have an idea, I have an image in my mind, and I want to transfer that image. I want to show other people that image. But by the way, not to go again too deep into philosophy, but even if we dig down to what communication is, in essence, it was Wittgenstein who broke it down. This was his life's work of what is communication? What is this thing of human beings communicating with each other. And it comes down to, as you said, also you're a visual thinker, but ultimately everyone is at least to some degree a visual thinker, because when you have a message in your mind, it comes together as some form of an image. And your goal in communication is nothing but to make that person see what you see. That's it. And good storytelling, show, not tell, right?
And in data, the problem is that the things you see, the thing we see, are not seen yet most time. So they're not kind of, well, let's call it mainstream, right? And so how you do that? And one powerful thing that I found out, and as I don't know if you watch the film Memento. Right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
20th anniversary edition. I have it on the shelf.
And then the follow up in terms of I think philosophical approach from the same director, Inception. So if you look at exactly what in Inception happens is that it's the idea I've got. I'm not gonna tell you that, I'm not gonna tell you the idea, but I will have someone else, in this case was the dream or someone in the dream. But if someone you trust, is someone you know already, is gonna come and tell you, look, this is quite a good idea. And then Roberto happens to voice the same thing, and you're convinced it's a good idea. And actually, after a couple of weeks, you come to me and you will tell me how good of an idea have you got. And that idea, effectively, was planted or was kind of a massage or was out there for you to pick, but autonomously, not forcefully. You will have the best result in influence that you can achieve when, instead of what usually people do when you go to them with your idea and say, that's rubbish, because it was originally kind of my idea, I would say, that's a fantastic idea. Let's put it in place. So you create an instant bond with this person, because now, oh gosh, I have someone appreciated me, and and someone is truly appreciating it, understanding. So achieving that takes a little bit of work, and it is not done with a malicious intention, right? And of course, I mean, we are all superheroes and we do things for the good of humanity, but it takes a bit more of an art, because, as you're saying, communication is so important and it's so tricky that I remember the first lecture, the first lesson I had from someone I took really day 2 in my data job. I was asking him, what should I do? Like you were saying, well, technically, should I put more cloud? I said, no, get yourself a communication expert. Get yourself a communication expert. And by the way, he said, not a person that does PowerPoints, like that's not a communication expert. You want a person that basically structuring your data campaign as a media campaign, that you're launching a new product, and you have your channels, you have your intent, you have your messages, you have your audit, your audiences, and everything is so structured that you basically are having a viral campaign in which the company thinks about data even before you go there and talk to them about data. And that's how you manage communication for data. But that's how you manage communication for any change, right? Because that's change is tough, and communication is the vehicle.
And I didn't expect that you will mention Inception, right? But I'm glad you did, right?
Again, you didn't prepare it, but
I'm glad you did, because that's actually one of my favorite movies. I mean, there are some popular movies out there that actually, if you scratch the surface, they are pretty superficial. I don't want to alienate a lot of the audience, but
no, don't.
Yeah. So I'm not going to bring examples, right? But Inception is one of those that's super popular, high-profile director, Christopher Nolan, Leonardo DiCaprio. Like really Tom Hardy, really good lineup, and the message is actually profound and philosophically sound. Christopher Nolan is a smart guy, and there are so many layers to that movie. Now, if we just look at it from a communications perspective, such a cool idea. Just a very short executive summary for those who might be listening and haven't seen the movie. It's basically about getting a high-level decision maker make a decision in your favor, and the whole movie is about implanting that idea through a dream, which sounds kind of wacky, but it's a brilliantly executed cinematic vision. And what are the takeaways for data leaders in this? Well,
homework for people in case they've not seen it tonight. Go and find Inception in one of your whatever streams you're using.
Exactly. I mean, it's enjoyable and educational at the same time. And
you need to have a notepad. You need to have a notepad because you need to annotate things. Otherwise, you get lost. Just yeah.
Exactly. It's definitely worth watching multiple times too.
Yeah.
And the key takeaway for data leaders in this sense is that the reason why this works, it's a huge decision that the guy needs to make, and they implant the idea through a dream, is because they appeal to the guy's personal story. They go down into the core of his emotions, like what drive him from beneath the surface. And then he basically makes the decision himself. So all they did, again, if we want to look at how this is relevant, is as a data leader, challenge me as always if you'd like, one of your main goals is to translate between the language of data and the language of the business. Right. And that translation process is basically letting go. So this is what requires a lot of humility also for data leaders, because you guys are smart,
It is.
Yeah. So
it is. And yeah, sorry, Laszlo.
No. Go ahead. I was just saying that you guys are smart and you know these complicated concepts. You know what data can do, and you almost have to give that up and then just connect to the business user, like watch the world through their eyes and start speaking into that instead of connecting to your abstractions, right?
So much so that two things here. One, if you don't have at your disposal a technology to go in someone's dreams, which is unfortunately very expensive these days, you can always go to the next best, which is make sure that one of their friends tells that, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's another thing. There's a Swiss philosopher that was saying, truth cannot be learned, something like that, but can only be absorbed by contagion. So if I'm giving you a lecture, if that lecture is not reinforced by one of your friends saying, wow, that was very good, I understood that, and actually how interesting was that point, that's an reinforcement, right? If it's just because you might have walked out of the room thinking, well, whatever, instead, having a friend of yours that says, well, but that was, it makes you, oh, wow, that was having some value. Similarly, so the second point from business point of view, you're so right in saying that we need to translate, because if I go to my CEO and say, hey, yesterday I fixed 50,000 customer addresses in one day, I mean, I might be nominated for the Oscar of data management, but I will have no more than a meh from my from my CEO, right? But if I go to them and say, hey, yesterday I fixed 50,000 data addresses of my customer, and from tomorrow your collection team will be 20% more efficient, and therefore you're probably going to see a much better return from your activity of collection. Now I'm translating in business terms, and it takes intimacy it takes me being humble enough to sit down with people in collection and knowing what they're doing to articulate a sentence, but that as a sentence it becomes much more powerful and buys me a seat at the next conversation where people will be wanting to have strategy enabled by data, because now they understand the connection. You see, back to what we're saying in terms of technicality, we return to the technical thing. If I have the ability to connect, I'm actually can translate now. So here where the technology helps me to talk to the business, because I can see a relationship between how better is my data in this piece, and how better is the process, how better is value, how better is revenue there. So that's pretty powerful.
And because usually we talk about again, the leadership element, like what kind of qualities you need to demonstrate as a data leader. Humility always comes up, and these are the reasons. Also, at the same time, you need to be assertive. You need to have the vision and drive it forward. A lot of people think that these are mutually exclusive. Oh, am I going to be humble or am I going to be assertive? Well, the answer is that needs to be.
You're going to be flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to be flexible. You're going to flex. There are moments to be. And actually, we did a training a while ago where you were having more of it's kind of a drama classes associated to business, and they were asking us to recite the Henry III speech to the or Richard III, speech to the troops. And in that speech, you will find all the different type of type of leadership or type of communication a leader should have. So you have the assertive. You have the more like the empathic. You're having the collaborative, because I think you can play all the roles. You can be humble, but it doesn't mean that you need to bend every time someone is asking you to change your mind, right? To change your mind on a dime. I mean, it's definitely you can be coherent, and you can be at the same time in listening mode, and you can be at the same time directive at the same time. It's part of a personality of someone, and I think is in communication and in leadership has to be seen like the color you can switch between in your signaling methodology, and that's definitely something that people will appreciate, because someone is in physics, they say if there is no gradient, there is no communication, right? So if you like always the same gray, I mean there is no understanding what's going on. So you need also to maintain certain interest to be a bit variable in what you're communicating.
So true. And we talked about this with Pete Williams from Penguin Random House. You probably know Pete,
Yeah, I was with him at a round table literally last week. Yes.
Okay, good stuff.
So he was telling me, you are a legend, but I don't understand what your company does. And then I explained again. So
good storytelling. Yeah, it's a case study. You have the relationship, and then you convey the story through that. So yeah, Pete is great, of course, and we're actually recording a data story with him. And we talked about this, like as a data leader, you have these dual roles. So first, you are a visionary and an architect. You need to build things. Okay, that's maybe where the technical and technological stuff comes in, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, you need to be really well versed in technology. You need to be able to build. Like that's one posture. And then the other posture is what he coins as the data conciliarge, right? The trusted advisor in the business, who's an ambassador.
Oh, the data therapist, right? The data therapist.
And the data therapist as well. Like very, very, very human. So in that sense, if you think about these different postures, you're being perceived in multiple ways from the business. Now, a quick question on this, because I also want to quickly explore that apart from culture, you mentioned that culture is the first pillar of your data excellence recipe. I want to know the second and third, right? But in an ideal world, how do you think that the data function, data analytics, is perceived in the business, and also you as a data leader? So if we exercise some empathy, how do you think you're being perceived and looked at? What kind of position you have in the company as a data analytics function, if that question makes sense?
The position changes because of the effect of the techne and the applied leadership of the data leader. So I now speak all the time about the 3Ds of the chief data officer, right? You start with the first D, which is dashboard. So when you go in, you're a chief dashboard officer, because that's your expectation now. There is, give me the more dashboards. Why? Because more dashboards, the better, right? But then you educate people and they understand that behind the dashboard, what is really important is data. So if the data is not good, the dashboard is not good. So finally, you transition to the second D, which is chief data officer. But where you want to get to is the third D, which is chief decision officer, because now we want to help them to understand what that data gives them for better decisions, how that data drives better decisions. So you create for them a causality between, if you invest more in data in this place and make a better decision in the other place. We'll go back to what is the link, what is the relationship? And that's where you want to be perceived. You want to be perceived as someone is a support for decision-making support. That's what I think is the next generation of chief data officer. They're going to be a mix of strategy, digital risk advisor, because let's not forget that with data, risks are coming, and some of these risks people are not seeing yet, or are seeing and are still saying, well, maybe it's too complex today, let's do it tomorrow. And so why? Because you want to drive the business change. You drive business change through decisions and strategic decisions that will actuate something in the business, and you need to help them to understand what's the effect of the decision. So there is all kinds of things you need to create in terms of the new perception. But at the beginning, the perception is very varied. If you just have to look in any of the job description you're having on the internet going around, or on LinkedIn or whatever, you literally sometimes look at someone like 20 people wrote. You have the vision of this job description going from XCOM leader to XCOM leader. Each one of them was adding another bullet point. So and should fix the search engine, and should clean the kitchen, and should do it, and should be accountable for all the data quality issues on planet Earth and maybe Mars as well. So you see that the perception at the beginning is an issue, but if you work well, you probably, as a maturity, as a journey, you bring them to the right place, which is a place in which we collaborate in having better decisions.
No, this makes a lot of sense to me. And then, so we looked at culture, right? You mentioned in terms of culture that data literacy. So what you were saying, just so I get that right. So you said that data literacy, you don't want to talk about it that way, but ultimately it is a part of culture, creating that data literacy, which we know is our secret handshake in the data world, right? But that's not how you position it.
We have to have. But look, the CFO will have their own secret handshake with all the CFOs, around them. They work on a better accounting, better technical controllership, better treasury, right? The same we're gonna do with metadata, with quality, with with reference data management. But we shouldn't go and boast about it, right? We should demonstrate what's the value of doing that. So, but if the three pillars are completely coherent to what I was saying before, because if the first pillar is about culture, the second pillar is about changing the way we change, because the realization is that the behaviors that we were discussing at the beginning that might be detrimental to data are reinforced when we do change. And what happens when we do big changes, big transformation? We forget about data. Data is an afterthought. So the second pillar is about bringing back into the center or aligned to the rest of the change, the data perspective. So today you do a business requirement and a function requirement, technical requirement, you should do a data requirement. Why not? You design for a solution, you should design for data. You build a solution, you should build your conception model for data. Why not? And we should probably decide that you have an operating model at the end that will keep data as it is. So that's the second pillar, is change the way we change. We do data by design, if you want to use another slogan. And then the third pillar, which is the consequence of it. So now the mindset is there. We are actually understanding what data is. We work for data. We, every day, every time we have a project, we change every project will fix a little bit more of data. And through that visibility, through that activity around data, we connect us to the value. So we get to understand where is the value. We are now measuring as good athletes that have been practicing and having now good regime, dietary regime and sleeping regime. We are now measuring the improvement of our personal best. And then the whole thing gets reinforced. So now understand what is the mechanism, and now going to do more practice, more learning, more measurement of the results. And value is not only monetizing the data like everyone wants to do, want to sell data, but value for me is also reducing the issues you're having around the company in terms of data. So your operations are more efficient, your customer experience is more seamless, and your experience of an employee is better, because let's not forget, you don't want to have a customer lives in the 21st century and your employees that are still dealing with the steampunk 19th century kind of a data environment, right? So those are the three pillars.
Okay, that's really cool. So basically, prepare the culture, and then change the way you do change management. So this data by design is this, a lot of these words are being thrown around, embedding analytics in the business, putting data at the heart of the organization, right? Is that what we're talking about in the second pillar?
No, we are talking about every time you breathe, every move you make, every breath you take, you do something good for data, right? So if you are dealing with a system today and you are opening, lifting the bonnet, check if the system is having all the right referentials in place. Check whether there is conformity. Check if there is the privacy is respected. All the good things that you should do. But if you decide to do that at the company scale, people are hyperventilating. Instead, doing that once every time you do a small thing, that becomes more an exercise. It's like practice in the gym. Every day you do 20 press ups. In 3 months you are Mr. Universe. Instead, if you go in the gym one day and you do 24 hours pressed up, you are going to end up in the hospital. So that's what we do sometimes. We do indigestion of data fixing and data remediation campaigns, and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. So consistency. And then last question, because I know, this just flew by, it
is.
Talk about these things forever. How should you prioritize them, what you do? Because I mean, a company like Schneider Electric, massive, right? You have so many opportunities to create value, to implement change. You have your own team to manage as well. So how do you prioritize well? How do you choose what to do every day? With this consistent action, how do you decide what to do next?
Well, the recommendation I give to everyone, you need to go where it counts. You need to make changes where it counts. And where it counts, well, it's easy. You listen what the CEO says, and that is usually articulated in an agenda of change that is percolated down to, projects or big initiatives. Then you need to go and paint those with the colors that, oh, this is important for data. Please, let's follow this. Please, let's insist on this one. And around that, you start to practice these three pillars. I think or there is another angle is there must be some places in the company where people are screaming because things are so bad. And usually these people are ready to sell their nuns to the devil. And you might be another incarnation of the devil. So you go back, you might be a benign incarnation of the devil. So they might help. So they will be happy to be helped. So this, I think, strategically, where the change agenda of the company, that's where you make it count. And tactically, when there are people screaming and tearing their hair, you go and help them.
Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful note to finish on. Roberto, this was fantastic. I think we ventured to new depths that we actually never managed to go to so far. Yeah. And we actually had the recording button on, so maybe others can gain value from it as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for having me, Laszlo. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Likewise, and hope to have you on the show maybe in the future as well.
Absolutely.